it is bred into us by our education and societal values, reinforces very ardently the current state of affairs as the way it is, and anything different is either a hearkening back to the Stalinist gulags or some wishy-washy utopian dreamland of impossibility. That is the artificial immune system that the current paradigm has installed in our minds to protect and perpetuate itself in our society. Remember the KGB used to, I think it was the KGB, used to indoctrinate their operatives with blocks in their mind? This was done so that in the case of their capture, it would actually be psychologically impossible for them to hemorrhage information under interrogation, and they would have a reaction similar to a psychotic break. Well, I know it may be outlandish to think about our own indoctrination in a similar light, but think about it. It is. It's just with our current indoctrination, the reaction is not a psychotic break, but ridicule, spite, hostility, fear, and apprehension. It's a very hard wall to break through. So you see the kind of obstacle we're up against as activists. However, it isn't completely insurmountable. We just have to be determined enough and care enough for ourselves and the rest of humanity to make things better once and for all. Now that's why that's partly why I get so disheartened by parents who display outright and proud apathy about the world. I mean, these people have brought another human life onto this planet, and still they don't give a shit about what kind of world they're forcing their child to inherit. And what makes matters even more treacherous is that they have the perfect defense for their apathy, don't they? And and anyone who's spoken to a parent like I have knows what defense that is. How dare you tell me how to raise my own kids? Do you have kids? No? Then shut the fuck up. It's a good thing I actively practice the subtle art of letting go of emotional attachments. Because the notion that sometimes comes into my mind is, how dare you determine the downfall of humanity by the simple act of perpetuating your own apathy and adherence to mere traditionalized notions of parenthood? How dare you decide for the rest of us that the world would benefit from even more resource depletion by your unthinking sprug dropping? But I never say that to them. Anyway, moving on. Question 9. It seems to me that there is a basic concept at the heart of the Zeitgeist movement that I agree with. With what humans can achieve would be limited by the natural resources and manpower available, and not by the lack of this man-made device we call money. But that does not imply we need to do away with money altogether. How about reforming the monetary system instead, so that money becomes our servant and not our master? Well, I can understand the notion of sticking with money. It's a safe option, in a way. It's, social change without having to go that far out of the comfort zone. But reforming the monetary system will not make things better, okay? I used to think so, don't get me wrong. I used to think that taking currency down a few pegs back to something controllable was a step in the right direction. I did used to think that. However, if we actually did that, say we did what Ron Paul wants and revert back to the gold standard, or perhaps we could bring back the greenback as proposed by Abraham Lincoln, or maybe we can listen to those lovely anarchists or similar organizations and have a sound money system. Well, that would be fine for a short while, but there is one white-hot burning question that I have been asking advocates of sound money for 2 years and never got a response. And it's this: what would stop that sound money from simply escalating back up into fractional reserve money again? And that is assuming that you have somehow convinced the rich elite to give up their monumental riches. Liquidize their assets, distribute them equally, start everyone on an equal footing, and then society goes from there. You know? I mean, we, the Zeitgeist movement, have enough people coming up to us and telling us that the rich elite will never agree with the RBE, when the rich, just like everyone else, are actually gaining a higher standard of living with an RBE and access to what they need. So how those who propose monetary reform get around this, I have no idea. So right there, with that proposal even, you have two major roadblocks to get through. First, convincing the elite to step down, and second, stopping money from evolving back to the cancer that it is right now yet again. The only other proposal is to simply enforce anti-monopolistic behaviour on society. But in that scenario, I've also asked these people, and no answer for this one, and no surprise either, what will stop those with more simply having more power? You see, that's the huge flaw I see in the reforming of money. It only implies pushing it back several paces or turning it sideways. But the inevitable gravitation of any system based on a medium of exchange will always inevitably lead to some form of capitalism. Whenever you have a system that is oriented around the exchange of some currency or commodity or debt coupon, you will always breed stratification by the very inherent nature of it. How do I know that? Well, say for example we lived in a world which was based on apples as a medium of exchange. Okay? I had 10 apples and you had 2 apples. I can demand more than you can merely by virtue of having more than you. Boom. That's it, folks. End of story. Okay? People may come back at that and say, oh, you could trade with other people and find you may end up having 20 apples. Well, that doesn't mean that you've suddenly gained morality along with your extra 10 apples. You know, or extra 18 apples. It just means that you are now the top of the pecking order. How is that fair? How is that equal? I propose that we simply do away with this childish game altogether, okay? Anyway, question 10. I've been wondering how you would respond to how the parable of the broken window poses a significant problem with your advocacy of alternative economics. Okay, well, to answer this question, all one would have to do is simply look up this parable and compare it to actual economic function. Just think about it. Planned, intrinsic, and perceived obsolescence relies on this parable, supposed morality tale of industriousness. Does any of that sound familiar? Tell you what, if not, then I have one word for you. Halliburton. I can see how this parable can be a good thing only in terms of GDP. As this parable illustrates, the very act of breaking the window causes the glazier to be hired to fix the window and hence the circulation of currency. But, as we already know from the work of John McMurtry, does the money sequence of value correlate to the life sequence of value? Is it an increase of GDP indicative to an increase in human well-being? Tell you what, I'll give you another example of this parable. The oncology industry. Okay? Cancer destroys millions upon millions of lives and millions more to grief every single year, and that number is increasing. But you gotta admit, it's wonderful for GDP. If you count the millions of people globally who are employed in this industry, all the pharmaceuticals, all the technology, all the procedures, and hence how much GDP is benefited because we are seeking treatments for cancer, it could be argued that cancer is wonderful for society. Now, for a moment, imagine that you could produce a cure for cancer into the healthcare service. What would happen to GDP and hence the economy? Those job losses due to the curing of cancer will be permanent, just like the job losses of the elevator operators, which was outmoded by the automated elevator, the iceman that was outmoded by the refrigerator, the till workers who are being steadily outmoded by self-service checkouts, and the automobile factory workers who have largely and steadily more being outmoded by automated machinery that build cars. A cure for cancer would thus cause a catastrophic drop in human purchasing power and thus also for GDP. And yes, resources and manpower will instead be devoted to other medical problems, you may say, but how many of them can be easily remedied if we can cure cancer? I have stated in the past that no sector on the planet can absorb these numerous job losses. The government cannot afford, let alone allow for any form of loss. However, we cannot afford to be completely unaware or worse, ignorant of the dire state of economical disparity that we are currently facing. New diseases, or at least perception of new diseases and conditions, are invented all the time so that the pharmaceutical companies can make more and more money, not to mention the deliberate diagnosis of conditions that are already pharmaceutically treatable, just so the prescriptions are made and pharma makes even more cash. How accurate and illustrative is that for the parable of the broken window? And I think all of you can use your own common sense to see whether the situation I have described is good for society. Right, well, that's all the time we have for the show, I'm afraid, folks. I thank you all from the bottom of my heart for listening. I really do. I appreciate your support for what is essentially a free service, and I make it as good as I can manage on a monthly basis. I guess instead of asking for money, I ask for sustained support and spreading of the show as far as you can, and also your questions. Your questions form the foundation for the structure of these Q&A shows, guys. Without them, these shows wouldn't be possible. So for that, I thank you guys again, and please, by all means, keep them coming. I'm sure you have at least one question you're burning to ask. As for the next show, I'm pleased to announce that Jim Phillips from tzmeducation.org is going to be returning for a chat, so look out for that one. It's going to be interesting. And also another quick announcement. I'm in the process of creating an experimental roundtable panel discussion series, as it were. Because I know that, my podcasts are probably the most infrequent in the movement. So, just to punctuate the gaps, I'm going to be creating a panel discussion show to discuss some really, really good topics. And but I've posted up on the Zeitgeist Movement page. I'm looking for, I think it's just one more panelist to discuss this, because I've got predominantly guys on the panel. I'd like to have a female panelist, if that's possible. So if you're a female member of the Zeitgeist Movement and you feel you have some insightful things to contribute towards the radio show to discuss certain topics, by all means, get in touch with me. But anyway, thank you very much for listening, guys. From myself, it's a farewell, and give me another hug, guys. There you go. Another virtual hug to all of you. Love you guys. Have a wonderful life. Bye-bye.